Good morning, everyone. I'm Patrick Owen. I'm a Operations and Policy Analyst with the Oregon Liquor Control Commission with the Medical Marijuana Program. I'm coming into this program after 3 years as the OLCC's Recreational Marijuana Compliance Technician. I can answer a number of questions. I'll be happy to do so at the end, so I ask that you hold your questions and use the provided slips to mark down anything you want to make sure to ask at the end. So we're going to be talking about the basics of the cannabis tracking system and what that means as a growth site administrator. Really quickly, I want to go over the timeline with everyone. There are copies of this in the back. As Carol pointed out during OHA's session, May 1st is when the designation of growth site administrators will begin. Continuing through May and June, we will be holding these workshops throughout the state. And starting May 15th and continuing through June, we will begin credentialing growers into the cannabis tracking system by collecting information from OHA as people register their information, and that feeds into the cannabis tracking system. As of July 1st, all grow sites that are subject to tracking in CTS will need to be credentialed and start getting all of their information into the system. Continuing on after that, the Oregon Liquor Control Commission will begin registering any grow sites, any grow site administrators who seek the privilege for the privilege of transferring up to 20 pounds of usable marijuana annually into the recreational marijuana system. And I'll go over the details of what that will look like further on in the presentation. It's important that we go over a few acronyms commonly used. Of course, as a government agency, we have any number of acronyms we use, and it can get a little confusing. The most prominent I will be using throughout this presentation is CTS, which stands for the Cannabis Tracking System. You will also hear it referred to as Metric, which is the brand name of the company that provides the service to the state. ODA, OHA, OLCC, and OMMP are the various Oregon marijuana programs we will be working with. ODA, of course, the Department of Agriculture, OHA, the Health Authority, OLCC, the Liquor Control Commission, and OMMP, the actual medical marijuana program administered by the Health Authority. OMOS is one most of our growers will be familiar with. That's the Oregon Medical Marijuana Online System for reporting. OWRD is the Water Resources Department, which growers who are seeking to transfer the 20 pounds into the recreational system will need to interact with. RFID and UID refer to the metric supplied tags which track information in the system and are physically affixed to marijuana items. And again, I'll go into a little more detail on what that means. Our overview for the presentation will start with setup requirements in CTS. We'll move into ongoing tracking and reporting, how to record transfers generally, although Metric will go into that in a little more detail during their portion. What a grow site transfer to an OLCC licensee looks like, what interaction you can expect to have as a grow site administrator, processing site, or dispensary with OLCC. I'll go over some additional resources, and then we'll have a brief Q&A session, time allowing. So first of all, for the grow sites, it's important that we recognize CTS is a seed-to-sale tracking system. It means it functions primarily as a closed-loop system with the intent that everything in the system after these initial startup years be traceable back to its origin, when it came into the system. With the need to transfer out to patients and certain types of patient type or external transfers, that means it's not always going to operate as a closed loop. There may be cases where a grow site transfers usable marijuana to a patient. Of course, the patients are not subject to the level of tracking in CTS, and that patient may bring it to a processing site to have an extract created. So it will go out of the system and then come back in during that portion when a processing site acquires it. There will be a lot of initial data entry into CTS, most of it by weight for grow sites. Anytime information is entered into the cannabis tracking system, it does require that, by rule, that weight be tracked, measured by an Oregon Department of Agriculture licensed scale. So if any grow sites are currently using scales that are not licensed, they will need to contact the Oregon Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures Division. Anything coming into or leaving someone's inventory is tracked via transport manifest. Those are the only ways to move items into and out of the tracked inventory in CTS, whether an internal, which means a license to license or registrant to registrant type transfer, or an external where it's going to some other entity or coming in from outside the system. A medical site that reports into CTS is not an OLCC licensee, so although the Commission will be administering the tracking system and will be reviewing, and you may occasionally have interactions with OLCC inspectors, that does not mean as a registrant that you have the full privileges of a licensee. You're still OHA registrant, and you're still subject to all of OHA's rules, with the exception that the tracking requirements set by OLCC now apply to you. The medical sites do not have any privilege to transfer to any OLCC licensees, except with the narrow exception of the 20-pound transfer, which has to be registered for. It's not an automatic privilege. And finally, lab testing. If you are in CTS, it is done through CTS, which means anything going to a lab is transferred to that lab. All of the testing laboratories in the state are licensed by OLCC, so they need to track inventory coming in. Again, I do ask if there's questions that we follow up with those at the end. Do we have any processing sites or dispensaries in the room today? If not, I will quickly go through this. I'm seeing one hand. Okay, another hand. Perfect. I will go into this. Obviously, with the majority of the medical marijuana sites being grow sites that are coming into the system, a lot of our materials will be focused on those. But the tracking requirements will still apply to processing sites and dispensaries. There are two types of tags in CTS, plant tags and package tags. Processing sites and dispensaries do not need to worry about plant tags. Even if the dispensary holds immature plants, everything in their system is tracked by packages, which means you'll order package tags only when you credential into CTS. Incoming and outgoing inventory, and this is true of all registrants, all licensees in CTS, will record inventory at the time it is received or when it leaves. So you cannot, for example, make a transfer and then 3 days later go back and track the inventory. The manifest requirements are such that that actually needs to be recorded at the time or immediately before it goes out and tracked when it comes in. So again, a lot of the initial work is going to be a significant amount of data entry in the tracking system. The initial setup is going to pretty much require that anyone entering information complete a training provided by Metric. Now, this is not for registrants for medical marijuana sites requirement in rule. However, in order to use the system, you are going to need training. Although it is very functional and a number of the functions are intuitive, there will be occasions where something will not be immediately apparent unless you've completed the training. So again, please sign up for the training. There are advanced trainings for specific types of registrants. So you have a basic training which all registrants and all licensees should take. And then if you are a processing site, there is an advanced training for processors. There is an advanced training for retailers and dispensaries. And there is an advanced training for grow sites and producers that goes into the specific functions those types of operations will use. Once you're in the system, you're going to add employees, you're going to set up strains, and you're going to set up items. We're going to talk a little bit about what needs to happen to meet the tracking requirements for those. First and foremost, once an administrator or a person responsible for the site is registered into CTS and has their facility set up, they're going to need to order UID tags. There's a 10-day timeline after getting credentialed into CTS to get all on-site inventory tracked. You cannot track inventory, with the exception of immature plants, until you have RFID tags, until you have tags actually associated with your facility in CTS. So those can be ordered through the interface in the online system. We do recommend that tags be expedited. Once you receive your UID tags, you're going to go in and start creating all of your items. From the Metric homepage, which is metric.com/Oregon, you can log in to the tracking system and you can schedule training in 2 locations there. It's very simple web interface, and those are very prominent, although you can see them circled in the screenshot on the side of the slide here. Once you've scheduled training, you can also view other specific training videos. The videos are just a few minutes long each. They go into some specific operations. For example, if you need a refresher or need to know how to record a transfer manifest, there's a specific video that will walk you through those steps without taking up all of your day. First thing every site should do is add all of its employees into the employees section. This is a tracking requirement by OLCC's rules, so anyone who will be working on the site needs to have their name and basic information tracked in the employees section. You will find yourself as a grow site administrator already listed in this area as the site administrator. When you're adding additional employees, you can give them any levels of permission. So for example, if you have workers who you do not want to be entering any information into CTS, you don't even have to give them privileges to log in and view everything for your facility. By contrast, if you have a partner you work very closely with and who will be responsible for entering some amount of data, you can actually give full permissions to that person to do everything the grow site administrator could do, up to and including credentialing or decredentialing additional users. We do recommend that only the grow site administrator have that privilege, but it's up to you as an individual operator to decide whether or not you want to grant somebody the ability to add more employees. Again, any user can enter information. So the GSA, the PRMG, the PRP, that is not the only person who has to be entering information into the system. And data can be entered remotely. So if you have an enormous amount of tracking data and you need to contact someone who works with you in another city, it's a web-based system. It's not a software system that requires any installation on your local machine, so they can actually log in remotely and enter data for you if you have that available. Before adding anything into CTS, we're going to need to set up strains and item types. So every item in the system is listed by a UID tag number, its strain name, and its item type. For example, I may have tag number 1234, strain name Blueberry Kush, and item type immature plant. I may have that same strain name and a different tag number associated with my usable marijuana, my flower, my bud, or my trim. Those are all separate item types that all will use that same parent strain. It's very easy to set this up. You do need those values populated before you can enter any packages, otherwise you will have no values to select when you're creating any particular package in CTS. But if you forget something, you can always quickly go back into the menu and add additional items, or if you acquire new genetics, new item types, you can always edit those lists. Setting those up on their own do not track your inventory. This is something that has come up occasionally in the recreational side. A user will go in and set up all of their strains, all of their different item types, and they will think that they're done tracking their inventory, and come a few days later when commission staff are reviewing the inventory, they see they actually have nothing tracked, although they did set up their item menus. So it's important to point out that setting those items and strains up is not tracking the inventory, that's just populating the values that you will then use to track your inventory. Ordering and receiving UID tags is done through the interface in CTS, so you'll need to first get credentialed. You cannot order tags ahead of time. They are embedded with your site information. They cannot be reused. So when you order the tags, the vendor actually prints the tags with the embedded RFID chip. That means that you can't transfer them to another site. You can't say, here, use some of my tags because I know you've run out. Each value is unique. That is the whole point of a unique identifier. So once it's been assigned, it cannot be reassigned to a new item. Although if damage occurs to a tag, for example, you have an outdoor plant and one of the tags gets destroyed by any number of the things that can happen to plants growing outdoors and it needs to be replaced, you can add a new tag to it through the web interface. Just assign a new number and that inactivates the old tag. You can always order more through the CTS interface. If you do not have enough, if you find you're going to need more, you can always go back up into that menu and add additional, and they will be shipped within a couple of days. You can expedite an order, which means that you can do overnight shipping. If you need to do that, you have to contact Metric support via the phone number and have your registration information available. There is no option in the system to expedite immediately. So we recommend, in order to meet that 10-day timeline, to avoid having to put in an enormous amount of data on days 8, 9, and 10, for example, that you expedite your initial tag order, and then if you will need more tags, that you do a standard order to follow up with that. It is a rule requirement that every site have an adequate supply of UID tags at all times. So not tagging plants that need to be tagged, for example, because you didn't have enough tags on hand and neglected to order them, it's not an excuse for failing to meet that tracking requirement. Again, we've got a 10-day timeline, 10-day time frame by rule to get everything on site into CTS. It's important that we meet that, going over that timeline, continuing to enter new data with no source after the 10th day. While important, if you haven't done that, is problematic because of the specific rule requirement. All marijuana items are subject to tracking, including seeds. So clones, seedlings, vegetative plants, mature plants, trim, usable marijuana, harvested and drying or curing marijuana, and any cannabinoid items. This will generally only pertain to dispensaries and processing sites, since grow sites should not have cannabinoid items. They all need to be tracked in the system. The seeds is probably the biggest one that there's a misunderstanding on. They are considered a marijuana item even though they have no THC in them. That's important because in order to provide that sort of seed to sale tracking, you need to identify where seedlings are coming from. If you have a package of seeds, everything will relate back to that package of seeds when you plant for them. CTS does not stop any user from entering more marijuana than they should have. For example, if you are allowed to have 16 plants because of the number of patients you are growing for, the system will not stop you from tracking more than 16 plants. The philosophy here is this is not a tool to stop you from doing anything, it's a tool to let you track what you're actually doing. So just be aware of that. There's not going to be a bunch of guardrails in place. There are some in certain places where it relates to certain types of transfers that would perpetuate other violations. But for the most part, the system's going to let you track what you're actually doing. It still behooves every grow site administrator, every PRP, every PRMG, every licensee to clearly understand what they are and are not allowed to do. So don't expect just because you were able to enter it that it's something that you're allowed to do. There are some specific types of tracking requirements in CTS. This will make more sense as users go through the CTS training, and we talk to Metric a little later this afternoon. Immature plants under 24 inches are tracked, even though there are not certain limits in place for grow sites, not currently. They're tracked in a plant batch. They do not require tags, so you give a particular batch a name, a strain type, and you could have any number of plants within that batch. And if clones die off, if they need to be culled just because they are not up to the level of quality you're looking for as a grower, then you need to adjust that number as you move through your tracking days. Once a plant reaches 24 inches, it needs to be assigned a plant tag. So the system allows you to move something from what it calls an immature state to a vegetative state. Generally, prior to reaching 24 inches, you want to move a plant into a vegetative state and assign it a tag. The specific rule requirement is just that any plant 24 inches or higher be assigned a plant tag. But you can do it earlier, and since plants continuously grow, it's generally recommended when you know a plant's going to move forward and you're going to move it in through veg and flower that you tag it at that time. Mature plants are created in the system by moving a vegetative plant into a flowering state. It keeps its current plant tag, so that tag follows it through the process. Usable marijuana is tracked by package tags. When you're setting up your initial inventory, you're going to use an incoming external transfer to create these items. So you're not going to create them from thin air, you're actually going to show them coming in as part of your initial registration into CTS. The tags themselves are physical items, which means tracking them in CTS alone is not sufficient. They actually need to be physically affixed with plant tags. With smaller plants, this usually means placing the physical tag in the dirt. It has a small plastic stand that allows you to do that. Once the plant becomes larger, more viable, it's generally recommended to physically affix it to the plant by looping it over, say, a lower branch. They have a plastic sort of zip tie mechanism that allows you to do that. Package tags need to be physically affixed to the outermost receptacle holding a quantity of marijuana items. So the term package in CTS just refers to any discrete quantity of marijuana. It can be untrimmed flower, it can be stalks that you're planning to trim later but have moved on from the harvest phase, it can be oils, extracts, and so on. It does not necessarily mean that the item is packaged and done and ready to move to market or to a dispensary or be distributed to a patient even. It just means a quantity of marijuana. That can be a little confusing because we do use the term package to refer to items for sale in our packaging and labeling requirements. So it's important to differentiate between what a package means in CTS and what it means maybe in the more real world. Tags reflect identical items. So I cannot, for example, have 12 different types of cannabinoid edibles under a single tag number and just say I have a specific quantity of them. The intent is that a tag represents an identical type of item by quantity, by weight, depending on the item type. For example, if I have a number of different strains of usable marijuana I'm tracking, I might have 10 pounds of strain A and 12 pounds of strain B. Those will each have their own unique package in CTS. Whether that package is a plastic bag, a Rubbermaid tote, some larger container, it doesn't matter. It's that physical receptacle that is considered the package, and that's the thing that the actual tag needs to be affixed to and then associated with the correct item in CTS. Once everything's initially set up, there's going to be ongoing tracking requirements, right? The inventory is going to need to be accurate from day to day. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means and some of the terms that come up and some of the key points that we've received a lot of questions about. First and foremost is the requirement for daily reconciliation. So OLCC's tracking rules require that a licensee, a registrant, reconcile their inventory daily. It does not necessarily mean everything needs to be hand counted. I'll go over that in more detail. Transfers need to be tracked through the system and laboratory testing as well. So daily reconciliation specifically refers to reconciling any changes before the beginning of business the next day. For a dispensary, that's pretty straightforward. That means before you open your doors the next day, your inventory needs to be 100% accurate. Again, that doesn't necessarily mean every item needs to be hand counted, but any item that had any amount taken from it or anything that came in new should be confirmed. For example, with loose marijuana that is distributed to patients, it's understood that there will be some variance either due to scales or moisture loss or just waste. Something may get dropped on the floor. Repackaging is also a point at which waste can occur, and therefore item values might not 100% match up. If you've created a bunch of pre-rolls, you'll probably lose some waste, or you may even add weight because the filters and tips of any pre-rolls are considered usable marijuana and need to be tracked by weight as well. There is no activity to report option in CTS. So if you haven't done anything, and this is particularly important for grow sites, if nothing's changed, if all your plants are still in veg, they're all growing, they're all doing fine, you're watering them, you're giving them nutrients, you don't have to change anything in CTS. You don't even need to log in to say I didn't do anything today. There's no activity to report button. The assumption is if you haven't changed anything that your inventory remains accurate. Again, information can be entered on-site or remotely. This is a web-based system. Just because you're not on site, just because you don't have access to your local computer, does not mean you cannot log into CTS and track activities that occurred. That may require some coordination if you've got one person on site doing the actual inventory tracking and another person off site putting the information into CTS. How you arrange that is really up to you as an operator. I want to reiterate, it's the person responsible who is responsible for entering all the information into CTS, making sure it's accurate, but you can credential any number of people to do that for you. It is on you to confirm that as a grow site administrator that they are entering information accurately. Daily reconciliation and the tracking requirements don't mean that you need to adjust everything immediately when something happens. If you're doing a large amount of trim, it does not mean you have to adjust that package throughout the day. It means that by the start of the next day, your inventory needs to be accurate. So what most grow site operators, most recreational marijuana producers will do is keep track, whether by a spreadsheet or paperwork or some other method, of all of the things they've done that day, and then designate a person to go in and enter that information after the fact. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have the option of going in and actively tracking things as they occur, but it gives some flexibility on meeting the tracking requirements. The Commission is going to be publishing some manual worksheets to assist with this, meaning an administrator or a designated person on site will be able to write down all of the activities they did and how they need to be tracked in the system, and those worksheets can later be used to enter the information into CTS. That is an option only. It's provided for convenience. It doesn't replace the tracking requirements, and it doesn't, in any case, allow any sort of stand-in for entering information in CTS. This is a software system. We have a number of growers, a number of producers who are in more remote areas who may not have the most reliable internet access. While it's exceedingly rare, it is possible CTS metrics servers might briefly go down, especially when they're upgrading information, upgrading the software. So if someone loses access to CTS for any reason, you still have a responsibility to keep accurate records and enter information immediately when you regain access. Tracking rules do require that if you find you've lost access, that you track when. You can't enter that into the system, obviously, because you've lost access, so you need to keep external records of that. And then when you regained access, you'll have a reasonable amount of time to re-enter all data. If it's been a long period that you've lost access, there might be some flexibility on that, but it's important that everything get in as soon as possible. A key point to that is you cannot record any transfers, whether incoming or outgoing, if you don't have CTS access. So you actually have to refrain from making transfers until you can record them, because the tracking requirements require that transfers be recorded before you actually complete the transfer. And I've just gone over this. For transfers to or from patients or sites that are not in CTS, you still have to record those as external transfers. And you have limits regarding packing plants and adding whole packages to transfers. So when you record a manifest in CTS, you can add packages to it, only packages. Now there may be instances where you need to transfer plants. You can actually pack plants. You can assign them a UID tag and create an item by count of immature plants or mature plants in some cases, if you're allowed to do that. For example, certain patients may receive mature plants. And then you can add them to a manifest. Once they're added to the manifest, you'll record them as outgoing or received, and that will move the items into or out of your inventory. You'll use the external transfer option to identify the source. It might reflect receipt of items from a patient, items outgoing to a patient, or again, your initial startup inventory. Whole packages are the only things that can be added to a manifest. So going back, a package in CTS, again, just represents some quantity of marijuana. If, for example, I have 10 pounds of usable marijuana in strain A, and I want to send only 1 pound to a patient or to a dispensary, I have to create a new package. The reason being, if I take 1 pound under this single unique tracked package and send it off under its current tag number, the system's actually treating that as the whole unit, that whole 10 pounds moving out. And when the receiving party records it as being received at 1 pound, that remaining 9 pounds is now untracked. And you've got 9 pounds of untracked marijuana on your site, which you don't want to have because obviously your inventory needs to be accurate. So anytime you send a smaller unit of usable marijuana or any item, you need to create a new package. So if I want to create 1 pound from that 10 pounds to send it out, I actually identify my source package, create a new 1 pound package, and send that 1 pound package out. And again, this will make more sense in the context of the metric training, and we can talk a little bit more about what these terms mean when we get into the metric portion. We talked about packing plants, manifests, transfers going to other entities in CTS can have multiple items on them, so you don't have to record a single manifest for each individual item. You can record multiple outgoing to a single location if, for example, you are transferring some usable marijuana to a dispensary and they call you and say, hey, can you send me some immature plants as well from this patient or that patient. You can record those as separate manifests to the same destination. So you've got some flexibility. Although you can add any number of packages to a single transfer, it's recommended that you don't add more than about 50 just because that amount of data tends to slow down the system. But you can keep adding packages until it won't let you anymore. Again, just because you as a grow site, a processing site, a dispensary are tracked in CTS, it does not mean that you are an OLCC licensee, which means you still remain subject to the transfer limits put in place under OMMP. If you are not allowed to perform a particular transfer type under the OHA's rules, you are still not allowed to perform that particular transfer type, although the system may not stop you from recording it. This is very important. Just like in the physical world, nothing's stopping you from doing something you're not supposed to necessarily. You could receive violations for it. It's important that you track your inventory accurately, so again, if you do it, make sure you're tracking it. But be aware that just because you can record something doesn't mean it's allowed. And this image here is a brief just sort of overview from OHA of the transfer types that are allowed. I expect most of our registrants are already familiar with what transfer types they're allowed to make. Although this is in the copies of the presentation in the back if you do want to grab a copy of it. Finally, for this section, lab testing. Any lab testing requirements you had remain the same. So if you are making a transfer type that did not require lab testing, you are not required to test. But if you are required to test, again, the most obvious example that you're sending usable marijuana to a dispensary, that has to be tracked and tested in CTS. That means creating a sample package. That means manifesting that usable marijuana to that laboratory. The reason this is important, all the test results are recorded in CTS. So when you log in, when you create your items, you'll see that you've got a column, you've got an information section relating to the testing status. When you initially create items, they're all going to say not submitted for testing. And you do not want to transfer an item that's not been submitted for testing to a dispensary. It's not allowed. So when you record this information correctly, the laboratory receives the sample into their inventory. They perform the necessary tests and they report that into CTS, and those results automatically populate back up to your parent package. That means you don't need to have that certificate of analysis from the laboratory in hand to know what your test results are. You can go to that package, you can see when the lab put the information in, and you can see what the results for every specific type of required test were. You are still required to segregate batches while the tests are being performed, so you cannot manipulate an item while it's out for testing. You can't add product to it. Obviously, that would mean the test results are really no longer valid. Again, the same restrictions that are in place already apply. 20-pound transfers. I think there's a lot of interest in this. We definitely have received a lot of comments, so I'm going to go over what the 20-pound transfer means, what it looks like, and what the registration requirements are. It's going to require an application to OLCC. It's going to require releases from your patients, just like any other patient transfer. There are limits in rule, and you do need to have approval before you can start making these types of transfers. So this is the actual rule. It's in OLCC's rules, which are up on marijuana.oregon.gov under the Laws and Rules page. If you haven't looked at it, I highly recommend that you open up that section. You can view the actual current rules that are up on the Secretary of State's website. But what this allows is for any medical grow sites that are tracked in CTS and have submitted the necessary information to OLCC to transfer up to 20 pounds annually. This is for the whole grow site, so this is not per grower. You have to have approval, and you have to have legal access to water. So you can apply for the privilege to transfer to OLCC licensed wholesalers and processors only. You have to submit a registration form to OLCC. It requires some acknowledgments. It provides some basic information that you sign off that you have read and understand. And most importantly, it requires proof of legal access to water. Once we've reviewed the form, we will confirm the information and send back written approval and actually toggle on the ability in CTS. So I mentioned earlier there's not a lot of guardrails in place in the tracking system. In this particular instance, there are. So if you are a grow site administrator, you're not going to have the option in CTS to record an outgoing transfer to an OLCC licensed wholesaler or processor. You're not going to be able to select them as a source or as a destination. We actually toggle this on for you once you receive approval. So what does legal access to water mean? Most of our grow sites have legal access to water for the purposes they're using it for, which is non-commercial. Medical marijuana is a non-commercial product. So certain domestic water rights that are allowed for non-commercial purposes, can be used to grow medical marijuana. But if you're performing any commercial activity with your crop, if you're selling it for profit, you're transferring it into the recreational marijuana system for a commercial purpose, that means your water right must be allowed for that commercial purpose. So certain wells don't have this, certain domestic rights do not have this. It'll be important to contact the Water Resources Department or provide proof of water certificates and permits. Some uses are exempt, certain types, from needing any particular water right. It's a matter of Oregon water law, which I will not get into during this presentation, but I'm happy to discuss afterwards. If you have an exempt use, you can fill out an exempt use form and submit it to the Oregon Water Resources Department, and they will provide that information back to you, which can go along with your application to register for this privilege. You do not need to provide proof of legal access to water to OLCC if you are not applying for this privilege. So this isn't a new requirement that everybody's going to have to immediately meet. This is only if you are applying for this specific privilege. Again, transfers are 20 pounds per grow site, not per grower. You're limited to 20 pounds in any 12-month period. That doesn't mean it all has to be at once. For example, you might transfer 5 pounds in January, 5 pounds in March, 5 pounds in April. Come next January, you'll have that additional 5 pounds. So it's sort of a rolling limit. And again, this is a system where Metric provides a level of guardrails for us. So if you try to transfer more than 20 pounds, it's going to stop you. If you say 21 pounds going out to this dispensary, it's going to say you don't have the privilege to do that. These are not external transfers, so you'll actually have your grow site as a source when you record it. You'll have the licensee as the destination. When they receive that information, they'll confirm that they got what you were sending them, and that will actually remove the item from your inventory and put it into theirs. Anything going to a processor or a wholesaler does need to meet all of the applicable testing requirements. And we'll have the registration form up at marijuana.oregon.gov. Again, we will not start registering sites until they're in CTS, so that won't be until after July 1st, although we should have the form up beforehand for people who want to prepare the information ahead of time. OLCC's site visits and compliance checks. So as mentioned during the OHA presentation, OLCC has some authority to conduct inspections, to visit grow sites, based on information we see in the tracking system. That means you may interact from time to time with an OLCC inspector. Generally, the way our inspectors operate is they collect necessary information. They may ask the grow site administrator, some employees questions, may take photographs of living plants, and we will be providing that information back to OHA for any necessary enforcement action if we do find a suspected violation. So OLCC inspectors aren't going to be out in the field writing tickets immediately. They're going to ask some questions. They're going to collect information, and it's going to be up to OHA to determine, what enforceable actions are necessary. So I just talked about our role, as well as OHA's. Again, our primary duties at OLCC, as far as enforcement goes for grow sites, for processing sites, for dispensaries, it's just going to be related to the tracking information. Our inspectors will identify themselves as state representatives. Should generally not be a surprise when we show up. When you try to give a notice, it may not be a week's notice. It may be the day before, just to make sure somebody's on site to receive us. Our inspectors are pretty recognizable. They carry state identification. They have badges. They are sworn peace officers, regulatory specialists. They drive big white trucks or vans or cars with the OLCC logo on the side, and lovely government e-plates. So you will know an OLCC inspector when you see them. But if you have any doubt, if you want to confirm that the person is who they say they are, you can always contact the OLCC's regional office to determine whether or not this person is who they say they are, confirm their DPSST number, whether they're out in the field that day. I mention this only because the concern's been expressed that how will I know this is OLCC? I don't want people just showing up randomly on my site because it's a matter of my safety. A lot of our sites obviously are at people's homes and residential areas, so you want to be able to confirm the person actually is an OLCC representative. And again, this information is both in the photocopy packets of this presentation at the back of the room, and you can go onto our website and find any of our regional contact information. Additional online resources, just very quickly, marijuana.oregon.gov. I would highly recommend burning that web address into your brain. This is a shortcut link to a longer link you may have seen that says something like oregon.gov/OLCC//. But marijuana.oregon.gov will take you right to our main landing page. There are a number of useful links along the left-hand side, one of which is this link to the cannabis tracking system we have. It's split into two subsections, one for OLCC licensees and one for OHA registrants. The information will largely be the same, so if you are a grow site, the information pertaining to OLCC producers is going to look almost identical. You're still growing plants, you're still tracking them in the same way, you are still harvesting marijuana, you're still creating usable marijuana. Right now, the OMMP site has a limited amount of information, but we will be populating that throughout this next year with more specific information pertaining to the OMMP section. That link is incorrect. It is metric.com/Oregon. And again, this is the main landing page for Metric. You can sign up for training. You can sign up for training early. You can sign up for training again if you need a refresher. And you can view many of the videos that they've posted up, which are short tutorials on very specific functions. The Department of Agriculture Weights and Measures Division is the agency responsible for licensing commercial scales, scales used for trade. So it's important that if you do not have a registered licensed scale, that you contact the Weights and Measures Division to set up a time to license your scale, because you will need a licensed scale when entering information into CTS. That is, again, is a rule requirement. The pesticide program also has a number of useful resources. Pesticides are obviously pretty limited in their use on cannabis due to a number of interacting requirements between the state and the federal government. Sonny Jones from ODA will be speaking on that in a little more detail. The OLCC's recreational and now medical marijuana hotline is 872-6366. We answer general compliance-related questions at that number. You can always leave a voicemail. They're pretty good about getting back to people within a day or two. You can also email. We set up a specific email for CTS-related questions, and that's marijuana.cts@oregon.gov. So if you need an answer in writing, something that's maybe less pressing, you can email us there. Finally, metric support. Metric support is available 6 days a week at 877-566-6506. This number is also displayed in the menus within CTS. So if you ever have a question about how do I do this specific thing, or any sort of general interaction with the system, you can contact the support line. Now, they will not tell you what you can and cannot do. They are not a compliance helpline. They will send you back to OLCC for any compliance-related questions. Am I allowed to? Those questions are going to come to us. But they'll tell you how to actually operate the system. And if you need a walkthrough of something, if you are not understanding the guidance that they've provided in their educational videos, someone on the phone will be happy to spend some time and walk through specifically. They have access to view your metric account once they've confirmed your information, so they can actually go in and help you walk through specific tracking scenarios. Complete a training before calling them. Definitely do the training. Do not call up metric support and expect them to help you set up your whole facility. They have staffed up quite a bit to support this incoming of all the grow sites and processing sites and dispensaries, but their resources are limited, and if you're tying somebody up with very basic questions that you could learn by taking a training, you're preventing another registrant from getting help specific to a problem they need. They're going to kick you back to training if you haven't taken it. Finally, just a brief splash screen of OLCC's mission. Thank you, everyone.